All right. So before Arvind starts, I'll just set the context. I know everyone has registered by looking at the session title itself, but yeah. So till now we have been saying many different things with respect to UiPath apps. I'm just making an assumption that people who are attending the call already know what UiPath apps is, right? So I'm just making that assumption that people here have an idea about UiPath apps, they have worked on it, or they have some knowledge about it, right? So today what we are going to talk about is we are going to talk about what happens after building the apps. How do you deploy it? What are the best practices? And I think I have one of the best speakers right now in the community, right? Arvind, I'll just give a brief introduction about himself. Maybe he'll also talk about it. But yeah, Arvind is a senior low-code platform consultant at Ashling Partners, and he has some amazing knowledge of UiPath apps. Like it's like he's my Wikipedia for UiPath apps. If I have questions, I'll reach out to him. I'll ask him, and most of the times he'll have answer to it. So, and he's also UiPath Apps MVP 2023, and also I remember he's for other products as well. But what we are focusing on right now today is UiPath apps. So that is what we have here in today's session. We'll talk about how to deploy an app, what are the best practices, and Arvind will also share his some personal experiences of what happens when you deploy an app and what are the things that you need to take care of. So let's get started with that. And if any questions, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask, right? Don't keep it a one-way communication that only Arvind is talking and presenting like a school teacher and everyone is just listening, right? So if you have any questions, please be interactive. Please ask more questions to Arvind, right? So that we learn more about the apps and the complete product of UiPath. So yeah, over to you, Arvind, and let's get started.
Yeah, thank you, Parth. I will share my screen. Let me know if you guys can
Yes,
see.
yes, please.
Yeah. So
Yes, we can.
cool. So thank you for a brief introduction, Parth, and setting up the call. So today, again, like we will be going through the UiPath apps, deploying best practices and insight. And I think we guys know about this chapter, Mumbai chapters. So we are like offline and online. Right now, we are doing online session. So organizers like Parth, Vibhor, and Rohit. And here you go. I'm the speaker, and already Parth said I'm working with Ashling Partners, and I'm senior low-code consultant, and I'm UiPath MVP for 2023. So the meeting agenda will be, though you guys know a little bit background of the low codes and maybe the apps, we will be talking about the introduction of the UiPath apps and what are the apps deployment inside and then development inside and deployment inside. And then we'll talk about some demo, maybe how it runs, and then some question and answer session. So introduction of UiPath apps, like UiPath apps is moreover like it's a very much kind of a low code, no code solution, right? So when we talk about low code and no code solution, what is low code and no code solutions we talk, right? So low code and no code solution is always like a kind of a quick development and a speedy development and quick deployment cycle. So when we talk about the quick development, then it becomes like a low cost as well. So we compare always low code is always inclined with the low cost and low complexity, and that's what we are talking about, low cost and complexity for the app deployment. And then you can build the apps and connect with your data service. So in UiPath apps you can connect with your data like data service, process, queue, orchestrator, and you can say integration service and the complex business model, right? So complex business model saying if you say like then if you have some Oracle, Salesforce, SharePoint, Dynamic 365, n number of integration if you have, because if you are working on a system, you can have n number of integration and you can easily integrate with those kind of system with the UiPath apps. And then we talked about the capable for building everything, like where we have a very much kind of a simple forms. You can design your good layouts. You can say desktop, mobiles friendly, and then you can deploy the solution, write the codes and everything. So UiPath apps like mostly work in kind of a pseudo methodology. And when we talk about pseudo methodology, what it is, so when we give a kind of a simple input to the computer, and computer understand what language you are talking to me. So similarly, in the UiPath apps, we are talking about procedural methodology, like when you can just drag and drop the conditions and maybe controls and write simple rules. If this equal to this, then do this. If this equal to this, then call this per particular function, call particular process and everything. So our process, our use system, computer understand very much easily with what we have right now. And then you can customize your apps like a specific task roles, and you can like create your task, and who can create the apps, who can deploy the apps, and those kind of things. And then you can like create a specific task and roles, and then you can design your apps. And then it's kind of a single click deployment. Once you just deploy it, and then you think your solution is ready and you want to just move the solution for the users, just go and click on publish, and then your solution will get published, and then you will have a kind of a published URL, and then just take that published URL and then try to just browse into, you can say, mobile or desktops, and then you try to do whatever you have right now, right? So then we talk about the main pillars of the UiPath apps. So there are four kind of pillars right now for UiPath apps. One is designer application, runtime application, server application, and WebSocket server, right? So when we talk about designer application, what is designer application? So designer application is something, if you go into UiPath cloud, so we have App Studio, right? And App Studio, in App Studio, you can go and design your application. You can design and write the rules and everything. So that's what we have into designer application, because App Studio is one of the main components of UiPath apps, where you can go and create and deploy the solution. And from where you can create your apps, open your existing app, and which launch into App Studio. And it talks through the kind of, and you can talk with the integration, like a process and controls, entity, data service, and everything. And everything's talked through the REST API over there internally. And then we have capable for like just designing the app and writing everything. Then we have something called runtime application. What is runtime? Runtime, like when we are launching an application after publish, when we are launching application, your client machine, it talks through some kind of REST API and it gets the response back, right? So for launching any application and page via execution roles, right? And apps runtimes launch the application and then get the response back. That's what it talks like runtime application. Then we have server application. Server application is a kind of a backend, completely backend application where we.
Arvind, there is one feedback in the chat. Can we just go little slow? Is what they are saying.
Okay.
Like maybe just understand each topic in detail and see if they have any questions. Then we can take it.
Okay. So shall we go through designer application, or shall we go like server application?
Let's start with designer again. Maybe briefly we can just talk about it.
So let's talk about the pillars like UiPath apps. Like we have four kind of pillars right now for UiPath apps. When we talk about the what are the pillars, we have designer application, runtime application, then we have server application and WebSocket server, right? So when we talk about the designer application, what exactly happened in designer application? So App Studio is one of the core component for the designer application. In App Studio, you can go and create the forms, you can write the rules, and you can just go and open your existing forms. You can assign the permissions and everything. So that's what exactly talk about the designer application. Runtime application is something when you design an apps, published it, and then you have a kind of a runtime URL, and then you run that particular URL, you can say app on any client machine, like either mobile or desktop. So that is called like a runtime application, and it talks through the REST API internally. It calls kind of a it make a communication between K2 cloud server and then your machine, and then once all the authentication happen, then it goes and runs the particular apps on your machine. That's what it talks about the runtime application. The next is server application. Server is something it completely into kind of a backend where UiPath used to both, you can say it in a both sense, like either you can go and design your application, our apps runtime. So design your application like you have a storage of apps like a data service, either you have controls of all rules page and everything. Because when you write a kind of a rules, so suppose you have one application and if you are writing one application rules into Web Studio, where it's saved into backend that called MongoDB or something. And then you have a kind of a runtime application where you just go and run the application. So when you run the application, it make a call to the server, and then it render everything on the front end, right? So that's what it talks about, completely backend, and it's completely like a mixer of backend and front end. So when you make a connection between front end, then it get a call from the server and get the response, everything from the front end. Then we have the last one, which is called WebSocket server. This is also a kind of a node application, which is WebSocket server listening kind of a client components, right? So whenever a client open App Studio from app, so a socket connection is established. So whenever you are opening a web studio, or maybe you are opening at a runtime, so maybe it kinds of a socket which create a connection between your backend and establish a socket server, like which is a kind of particularly a process, and certain, like you can say, among clients and some of the apps, which is web socket, we can say. And then it make a connection and mainly talk between, or you can say, web socket and then whatever making calls on the server. Then now we will talk about the development best practice. So guys, there could be a number of development best practices, but this is what we have assumed, and this is what, based on my experience coming back to the low code platforms and everything. So you can create a number of best practices, whatever you think, but I have just listed out some of the best practices which you can use to design your apps in a good way. So like, always use kind of, maybe use kind of a data service. In a data service, it makes a kind of confusion. So what kind of data service, what entity you want to move from one tenant to another tenant. So something we found out, like maybe just make a kind of a schema, which is a schema is a kind of abbreviation. So maybe just suppose you have a leave request, so LR is a kind of abbreviation. So you can easily identify these many kind of entity are being used into these apps, right? So maybe just while you are creating any data service, make a kind of abbreviation, like some common name, and then create entity with a particular name. So suppose we have a leave request, so we are creating a kind of abbreviation LR and underscore entity name. So I can see LR underscore leave request, LR underscore leave type. So these will give a kind of a good identification while I am on data service page, and then I can easily identify, okay, these many entity are being used into these apps, right? Like leave request or something. So similarly, you can create a kind of related process, because in your tenant there could be a number of process, and sometimes you are creating an apps and your apps is connected with one process, and then someone comes on your tenant, and then it makes kind of confusion whether this process are being used somewhere or somewhere. So what you can say, like you can make similarly LR underscore process name. So this will give a kind of a good naming convention, and you can easily identify. And then you can avoid ambiguous name, avoid any space into name. So like while you are creating any apps in pages, controls, and anything, just avoid any space between that. Create any entity relationship if required. So if you suppose if you have a leave request and then if you have leave request type, so directly don't go and create both tables and then just try to save the data into backend. So make a kind of foreign key relationship. I mean a kind of entity relationship. When so you have a entity, and if you have a kind of a master entity, you can say you have a global entity, make a relationship, and then try to save the ID and join between that, and build an app with multiple pages, then overloading into single pages with many controls. So if you have a page, UiPath apps page is a kind of a lazy loading, right? So when you load one apps, it will load per the particular page, and once you scroll down, it will again load. So it is kind of a lazy loading. So suppose if you scroll your mouse very quickly, it will not load everything. So sometimes your control will not be loaded, and you will see that your controls are missing. So try to like maybe like try to avoid building a lot of controls or maybe overloading into single page. Rather than, what you can do, you can create a kind of containers and then page container, and call that page container into apps, and try to like show that particular containers or apps wherever is required. Don't try to show everything's on the page load, right? So
Right.
you
And yeah, to add over here as well, one thing, like to whatever things Arvind is saying, right? Anyone in the call who has came across the same thing that they were working on an UiPath app project and they face similar things in their organization. Any, experience that you would like to share on the same lines? Maybe then we'll get an idea of what issues you are facing, or if you're doing something different than what Arvind is already talking about. Anyone in the call would like to share anything on that lines? We need to make the session interactive. Like I said, not Arvind being a school teacher and just talking on a topic, right? So anyone over here faced similar kind of issues? I don't see anything. I think Arvind, you can come.
Okay. So now I'm saying like limit the nestedness like a container. So because I have seen a lot of like apps in my experience, people are creating one container, putting another container, putting another container. So it is kind of nested container. So the as many nested containers you create, it creates a lot of weight on your apps and it go kind of performance issue. So just limit it, try to avoid a number of containers rather than try to see if you can fit your all the things in a single container or maybe in multiple containers rather than writing a lot of containers on your page. Then if you're coming back to the you can say table or list or to display. So if you have a just to display records, so maybe like I would say just display maximum 200 records at a one shot, and then like if you have more than one 200, then try to like get sorting and maybe filter out, and then based on the filter get the data, and then try to just display 200 records rather than displaying 1,000 records at a time. So that way you can make a good performance on your page and apps, right? Then make button looks like a button. So if you see that this page, which I am showing you ready to publish and ready to publish, save for later and publish and save for later and publish. If you can see that first one is looking like a button, and second one is not looking like a button. So don't try to make like whatever buttons or anything like maybe like I can say over engineering over there, over styling over there. So make such kind of simple button looks like a button and visually differentiate primary and secondary action. So rather than making a lot of primary action on the page, try to avoid primary and secondary action. So what do you mean by primary and secondary action? So while I am going onto apps and I'm seeing a lot of buttons like 1, 2, 3. So let me tell you one example. Like suppose we have an action, like I'm creating an apps with action, approve, reject, and then rework, right? And then someone is coming into apps and designing like a approve button, reject button, rework button, cancel button. So there are 3 to 4 buttons. And then once I'm going to the apps, it looks very ugly. Like there are 4 to 5 buttons. So rather than try to make a kind of one primary button, like maybe just make submit and cancel or save and cancel, and then keep all the action kind of into drop down and make it mandatory. So the moment I select the drop down action, maybe you can say approve or reject, then based on the submit click, just handle the rules accordingly. So just try to make primary and secondary what could be the best way. So when users go to your page and they can identify this is primary and this is secondary, rather than going and finding where is my secondary and primary buttons, right? And don't have more than one primary actions. I would say that's what I'm saying, like save or submit once. And what should be simple and to the point. So while you are showing kind of confirmation message or anything, just make it kind of a very specific. Don't try to confuse to the users, okay, what exactly it means. So otherwise they will come back, what exactly it means, what kind of confirmation message or what kind of error message is this, right? So that's what I'm talking. What should be simple and to the point. Avoid generic commands such as okay in dialog box. So use a specific keywords, allow users to recover from accidents. And this means like what I'm talking, allow users from recover to accidents. So suppose someone by default delete one record, to try to make it like accidental maybe recovery. So maybe on every delete on every transaction, wherever you are deleting the record, must give a kind of confirmation message. Are you sure you want to delete this particular record? And if user said okay, then go ahead and delete it. And in the backend, try to not delete the records. Maybe you can say just is soft delete. Soft delete, it means like when you have a n number of records, make it in every master entity like a is delete or not. So when I delete the record, just go and mark that particular record is deleted. That makes true. So when someone comes and say like my record has been deleted, where it is, so you can easily go and make it like okay, is delete in background, make it false, right? And then it will be available to the users. So rather than hard delete, try to make it a soft delete until unless users ask specifically or business asks specifically to go and delete a hard delete, right? And then on every possible rules into apps, throw the exception. That's what, like if you have any error message, try to catch the, like when you are calling a process, don't try to throw a generic message to the users like object reference not found. Doesn't make any sense to the users, right? So maybe in every rules, wherever you are writing, and if you have a kind of errors rule, try to write kind of a message box and try to throw a message over there to the apps. Okay, this is the errors. Maybe if you have a data service and if you have process, you can easily go and make your message more user friendly and try to throw that kind of a error message rather than trying to throw the kind of a very specific and generic error message to the user, because that doesn't make any sense to the users, right? Some UX design don't use a kind of vibrant color on container or page. So you can see the vibrant color, which is kind of left, and then white colors on the right side. So if you make a kind of vibrant colors, and when I go and see the app, it looks very much kind of vibrant to the eye, right? So just make it kind of white colors and then give what colors suit on the particulars containers or page, and then provide ever contrast, like enough contrast on that background color. So while if you are writing like making any background color, just put kind of enough contrast on the text, so users can easily go and read that particular text, right? Use color consistency across the app. So don't try to write like one button should be red, another button should be blue, another button should be some other color, right? So try to make it a kind of across consistency across the page and everything. This is what I'm talking. And then some of the naming convention which we have discovered, development naming convention. So there are application, there are page, there are containers and controls. So while you are making an application, so assume there are kind of one application, one app you are making kind of leave request or job application. So maybe just make it like a job application, maybe dev, UAT and prod, because assume you have single app for 3 tenants, like because apps is not specific to the tenant, apps is specific to the organization. So once you create one app, it will be available to the all the organizations. So how can you handle it? That's what we are going to talk. And so in that way you can make kind of a naming convention. So easily you can identify these apps is connected with the particular dev tenant. This app is connected with my UAT, or this app is connected to the prod. So what you can do, you can make it like app name, and then you can give underscore or maybe dev app name UAT, and then you can easily identify this. Similarly, if you have a pages, just give, which I said, like don't give any space and all. So give some meaningful name of your page, and then give page or pop-up page. So like if we have admin page, I'm just giving admin page, new request page, and if we have some kind of a pop-up, I'm saying more info pop-up page. So you can easily identify, like when you go and open the page, you can easily identify what exactly it means, right? So similarly, you have a containers and controls. So similarly, I'm talking about like if you have any containers, go and give some meaningful name and then give a container at the end. So like if you have a master container, header container, footer container, so you can give master container, header container, footer container, something like that. So again, it applies to controls. Like if you have a lot of controls, like it could be text box, text area, or date and times, drop downs and anything, right? So give some meaningful name and then let it be like a default control type, because every control type has a default name into apps. So just put name, text box, state drop down, state date picker. So this will give you a kind of a better idea. And once you open your page, it will looks more kind of organized what exactly you have written for your application, pages, container, and control, and you can easily find your names, and you will not have any kind of ambiguity or any kind of confusions over there. Okay. Anything like so far, then I can talk about the current process deployment, how it is right now and how we are going to propose.
Good, Arvind. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for sharing.
Okay, so we'll move to the current process deployment. So if you see this image, how it looks like, what is your current process deployment? What do you mean by process deployment? I mean, I'm talking what about the tenant deployment. When you have a kind of data service or a storage bucket or a Wave Studio, or you can say RPA processes in a studio, right? How your deployment happens every day. So you have UiPath Studio, and then you have orchestrator, right? So you develop everything and publish, and then go and deploy to the particular orchestrator, and you can say particular tenant, right? But if you come to apps deployment, you have developed, you have published, but when you deployed, it is not going to orchestrator. So it becomes like a org level, right? So suppose in one org, one cloud, if you have multiple tenant, and then once you deploy the apps, and suppose this apps is connected with your one of the tenant, which is called dev tenant, right? Now, if deployed it and published it, anybody can see that. But tomorrow, what happens if you go and just deploy the solution into production? You have to go import it, export it, and then import and export. And then you have to make all the changes into connections, like go and replace the connection if you have data service, if you have a studio, process studio, or maybe if you have a storage bucket, everything you will have to go and replace one by one manually, right? Otherwise, what you have to do, you have to go every time import, export, a lot of other process will be there. So what are the best process practices? Why we are now, I will talk why we are talking about that, because suppose you have one process, one apps, and you deploy the apps, tested the apps, and then you import the app and export the app, right? And then you make it kind of a production app. Then tomorrow, if you have one change, are you going to make that changes into apps manually and then production manually? Yes, right now we can say yes, I'm making one changes into apps manually and then production manually. Either you can say I have only one apps which is connected initially with the development. Now it is connected to the production. I made all the connection changes to the production. So now whenever I am making any CR is there, change request are there, I'm making all the changes into production directly, right? So when you make any changes into production directly, what happens if anything break, or maybe what are the downtime? If the changes are more, maybe around 40 hours or 80 hours, are you going to take the 40 hours and 80 hours risk or efforts into production directly? That looks to me a kind of a risk. Otherwise, do you think like, are you going to make 40 hours changes into dev app and then export the app and then go and deploy the app into import the app into for production and then make the changes, connections and everything? Then what are the drawback for that? Because once you import and export, every time URL will get changed. So suppose you have one apps, first time you deploy the apps, tomorrow after 15 days or 1 month, there are one CR for 40 hours. So you will say, okay, I will make the apps change directly into production. Otherwise you will make the apps changes into dev, and then I will import and export into production, and then I will change the connection. So that time the drawback will be like, either you put the 80 hours effort, either you will have to change your apps URL, and then every time if your apps URL gets changed, what are you going to do? Are you going to tell to the business users, okay, this is something which I deployed and my URL got changed? Then your business user will get frustrated. What is happening around that? Because your apps URL are getting changed every deployment. So, and you cannot go and tell a number of business users that this URL has been changed and anything, right? So just to overcome from that, what we are doing, what are the best practices? I'm just going to demonstrate here. So apps deployment best practice, create one single apps management page. Or you can say apps. So what you can do, you can create one single apps management, and then single apps management will take care of all your subsidiary kind of apps. Maybe like you will have kind of leave request, and if you have a job application, you have HR application, in number of apps, right? So create one kind of a global apps which will take care of all your apps, and then you can navigate from your global app to the all the apps individually, right? Then create one single entity for apps configuration. So what we are doing is to create a single entity for apps configuration. Whenever is your apps URL getting changed after import and export, what you can do, you can just go and copy paste your URL into backend. So in that way, your customer or end customer will never feel that there are deployment and it happened or URL got changed, right? Then navigate all the apps from the apps management page rather than separately. So you will have a one apps common app, and it will navigate to all the apps whatever you develop and configure. Using apps management page, avoid big changes, time loss, URL duplicate, or save the time, which I'm talking, right? So let's see what exactly it is, right? So we have apps configuration here. I'm just demonstrating it right now. So we have one entity. I have created one apps configuration, if you see. And then in apps configuration, what I'm trying to do, I'm giving app name and app URL, right? And then if I created one apps, whatever the app name and URL, I will just go and configure it here. Then we have apps management, which is like one single apps management. So I just created one single apps management and then connected with apps configuration entity once, like it is minimal change. And then what we do on the drop down change or menu containers, or you can give the buttons, it depends on you. And then every time what you can do, you can just go and open the URL, and in the URL, you can just get this URL, app URL, and then on selection of the drop down, you can just configure to the apps. So let me show you, like here in the apps configuration, you will have a kind of app name, product feedback, user management, or anything. And then you have app URL. So whenever you are deploying apps into the production after the making changes, what you can do, you can import, export. So before that, what you can do, you can take your backup of your apps from the production, and then you can delete your apps. This is the current process, and delete the apps, then export the app, import the app from the product development, whatever changes you make, and then go into production, create a new app, export it, import it from the development apps nupkg file, and then just go and publish it, give the permissions and everything, and then take the latest URL, the change URL, and then just place it here into backend. So only you will feel that there is a change, but the front users like will have always a front, you can say global apps URL, and they will never feel that you are changing something into background. And this is something we have a kind of one global apps where you can just go and configure, and you can just navigate from one apps to another apps. So like just a second. So I have a drop down. In drop down, I'm just listing all the, you can say, apps, and then on the selection of the apps, I'm just doing one by one. So we have seen like couple of apps, and then through the apps, once we select, we'll go one by one based on the selection. So after that, like if you have any questions, we'll stop. Otherwise, I will show you something into App Studio. So let's talk if you have any question. Any doubts, any question here?
I don't see any in the chat as of now, but I hope people have questions and they will ask.
The chat question, maybe we can take it again. Do you think you can?
Let's wait for a minute or two. Maybe if anyone has
Hello,
questions.
Yeah.
Yes, Vijay.
So this apps, right? Okay, once you said we cannot publish into same orchestrator, meaning that where we are publishing it.
So when we are creating an app, so suppose you have UiPath Cloud org unit means like particular unit like company name. So UiPath Cloud / particular org, then / tenant will be there, right? So whenever you are creating any apps and you are publishing it, it will go onto your org, not on particular tenant, but it can connect with your different tenant. Either you can dev, prod, UAT, and that will have kind of process other dependency like data service, storage buckets, which is like connected with your tenant. So, and your apps will always connect with your org unit. So when you are moving from one tenant to another tenant for that apps, then every time you have to go and make a change into connections and everything, then it will available and you can connect with your another tenants. That's what I'm talking.
Okay, fine.
Yeah. Hi, Arvind. Pradeep this side.
Yeah, Pradeep.
Yeah. So my question is, what happens sometimes before we publish the app works perfectly, but after we publish that app and we use the published version, at that time, uh, sometimes behaves differently. Is there kind of bug?
Can you just send me what a specific what screens you are feeling like, because it becomes too generic to tell like what
Like
exactly.
sometimes I have some I will give you an example. Sometimes I have some hidden containers. Uh, so when I run the app on that page loading event before the publish, if I run the app, then it works perfect. It works perfectly. It doesn't show that uh, the container that I have as a hidden. But when I publish the app, sometimes that hidden container get into the screen after the after I publish that app.
Yeah, that could be like, that's what I'm telling, that because containers is always like this page like is it kind of lazy loading? What do you mean by lazy loading? Like the mouse, as you move your mouse, the page will get loaded, all the controls, containers and everything, all the rules, right? So sometimes if you suppose you are just moving your mouse very frequently and then like in a speed, so sometimes what happen, your control may be not rendered or not loaded 100% on your page, and then in that way you will feel like that whatever expressions or rules you have written on the hidden, or maybe you can say uh, display anything that may not work. So that's what I was talking, just try to avoid a number of rules, a number of, you can say, control binding in a single page, rather than
Okay.
try to bind with a different page container and see. So that is not a page. I would say sometimes your mouse is moving like so speed fast, right? Because sometimes we are human, we just try to move one mouse here to there, and in that way
Right.
you will feel sometimes something is breaking. So that's the way, the best way is try to avoid too much big fonts, try to make it simple and kind of a apps, right? And try to see that how it
Yes.
works. Okay,
Okay. Got it. Thanks, Arvind.
no problem. Anyone else?
Seems like we are good.
Okay, so I will go to App Studio. Can you see that App Studio screen, Parth?
Yeah, we can see.
Okay, cool. So guys, let me tell you what is the deployment. So if you go to data service, so in the data service, I have apps configuration. In apps configuration, I have different app names. So this is not going to change. If you something get changed, you can change it always. And then this URL you can change whenever your app is getting import and export onto production. And then you can change this URL, and then you just will not fill in the front or something. And then what we can do, we can go back here. Okay, sure. So we have apps. So you can see how my apps naming convention is like. I have apps management dev, which will be like kind of my global apps. And then we have different app product feedback surveys. Then we have invoice management dev, then user management dev. And then see why we are making these, because these apps management has a minimal change. You can say 10 minutes or 15 minutes, something like that. So if I go and edit this page, so what I'm doing, I have just one orchestrator and then one entity, and that is called connected with apps configuration. So it will be like a kind of one-time deployment from one tenant to another tenant into production. And then once you deploy, just deploy this solution. And then here into, you can say, I have written a drop down. And in the drop down, I have written a kind of rules like this one, and then select object or app URL. So I'm just calling the kind of a selected object. So if you go to here, menu drop down selected object. So I'm just trying to call this selected object binding with the app URL. So I have this one, and this is kind of a minimal change. Now, if you go to apps. So if I run these apps here, I will have this kind of home page for apps always. Just a second.
Are we waiting for something, Arvind? You are on mute. You are on.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
I'm trying to hide this. It comes on the front end.
Okay.
Okay, no problem. Okay, so if you see this one, just a second.
Maybe we can refresh it.
Just a second. Okay, so let's see there. So I have a list of kind of a product name, like apps name, product feedback, invoice management, user management. The moment I select product feedback, this will go to the particular apps. And then you can change this. And then what I'm trying to do, I'm just trying to navigate this. So while I'm making any change into these apps and I deployed into production, you don't have to do a lot of changes here. So right. And then that way, this app URL will always have with users and it will never change. And then users can feel that you made a new deployments and change and everything. Otherwise, what happens, you will have to always give this new URL, because the moment you import and export this UID will change and then app URL will change, right? So that is the one, I can say, that advantage of this apps management. By using this apps management, you can save your time. You can make a kind of a deployment cycles more smooth, more easy, and everything. So that's what I can say. Like overall, like apps deployment life cycle or best practices and everything. So if you have anything, we can talk now about QA, and let me go and demonstrate again. So if we have, so these are some community URL and about community. We can talk about the questions and remarks if you have anything.
So Arvind,
Arvind,
okay, whoever is there, you can go ahead.
okay, thank you. Arvind, Vijay here. So
Yeah.
do you have in UiPath, right? Usually we will be having snippets for exploring that kind of any orchestration process. Just a sample. Is there any sample process which is already built by UiPath for apps?
So right now we have, like, if you create, let me show you. If you go and create a new page app, so let's say demo, and you can just go and create. And then while you are adding a kind of page, right? So you can select some template of the page, like you have a kind of dashboard form, And then
Oh,
this one
okay.
being informed. So you can select these many kind of a template. And again, this is coming more again, like, so lot of template will be there down the line.
Okay, got it. And also one more last question, like this data, app service data is going to insert into SQL database, right? Which is while installing orchestrator will be configuring SQL. The same database, it will be adding this app service data also.
I didn't get your questions. Like,
No, I'll. So Vijay, this has nothing to do with the SQL that you use during orchestrator installation. This is basically an independent SQL. Data service is
Okay.
an SQL that you can understand, like just to set the context. So in data service, you have to create your own entities, that is tables in terms of SQL. Then you have to add data, add columns, and then you can directly use it over there. So it has nothing to do, or it does not insert or update the data directly in the SQL.
so data service is kind of a cloud backend for the UiPath apps, UiPath, not UiPath apps. So by using the data service, you can save your data into UiPath cloud tenant, UiPath storage itself. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay,
So
fine. Got it.
it's an independent storage unit. It has nothing to do with the SQL.
Yeah.
But may I know where it is actually saving?
Mostly, I think mostly MongoDB, I think in backend, but
But you don't have access.
no, you cannot access any cloud data for any tools, like not even UiPath. Like you need certain access permission, lot of things you cannot access there because that is sitting into cloud, right?
Because my organization is having on-premise orchestrator. Because just curious, it will not save it into UiPath related cloud servers. It will be in my organization cloud servers only. Just curious where it is saving. I would like to see that.
So you can connect with your organization backend, and then you can connect with your backend and you can save the data into your organization. It's not mandatory to connect always with the data service, right? So you can connect with, that's what we were talking, that we have a process integration service and where you can handle complex data and complex business logic. And then you can call your backend, maybe a store proc function and tables and everything, and then you connect with your process apps.
Okay, got it.
Okay, my turn. Arvind, the basic idea around this approach is like how you keep the different production URLs say one place, right? So whenever a new development, new changes are there, you would just change the URL in your entity. Two problems that I face, like first of all, in this approach, how I am supposed to restrict the access for the users for the particular app. Like out of the three application apps that you have listed, I want 5 users to access the first app, 6 different users to app the second app, and maybe a combination of 2 from the first, 3 from the second one group to use the third app. Because we cannot have different groups or different practices to even see that this app exists or how it works. It is like kind of isolation for each team.
Yeah, so we have multiple way, like you can either call that particular drop down based on the maybe users roles and permissions, so that we can extend this kind of apps homepage. And otherwise, like you can handle those permissions and everything on your sub app. So the moment you just select, it will throw an error and it will say that you don't have permission. So that way you can handle that, right? So the moment someone trying to access your apps and which you don't have access, you will show an error message, and you can say you don't have error kind of permission to access that particular app. Otherwise, if you don't want to do it completely into drop down, so what we can do, we can like fetch maybe make a relationship another entity, and we can create another entity with user management, and then through user management we can fetch the list of the, you can say, apps for that. So that there are
Something like user opens, we from the user management check if this user is in the accessible
So
list or not. Right?
yeah, what you can do for that is in every app, we will have main page, right? In that,
During load time, we can do that.
during load time, yeah, and just have one single data service that has all the details or all the users' email ID and the apps they can access. So if you find an entry for that, that the access is there, just load the page or have that one single access denied page that you can
Mhm.
just load that you don't have access to the app. Please contact your administrator, something like that.
And so now, to do any changes, what is the process flow that you follow? Like, do you clone the app, do the changes, delete the older one, and publish the latest one? Is it something like that?
So this will be one time, and then the rest of the pages, like you make a kind of a dev and prod. So that
Mhm.
is what I was talking, like once suppose there are 1 week of change into your app. So go and make the changes, test everything into dev, and then go to your prod tenant, and then maybe make a downtime for your prod tenant, because every time you will have to delete the app. So what you can do, you can delete your apps, take a backup of your apps for maybe into wherever your cloud DevOps and everything, maybe in case something go worse, you can revert back. So just go and import and export the apps again, and then give the permission, whatever permissions you have given previous to the users, and then just go and publish it. And then once you publish, you will have a new URL, and then just go and replace the new URL into entity data service. That's it.
I
So
think, Arvind, the confusion point over here is the tenant part. App is on not on tenant level, it's more on like complete organization level. You can access the same app from each tenant.
that's what we are talking, right? So that's why we are trying to avoid those kind of reworks, reconfusion. So that's what we are saying, import and export, and then just make the changes for that particular tenant. If you have prod, replace all the connections, give the permission, publish it, then you will have an URL, and then take that URL and just replace into backend, which is into data service.
No, so when you are saying about tenant, you are referring to the, I guess, data service part, right? Not the app, because app is tenant free.
Yeah,
It-
that's what we are talking. Like every apps we are making sure this app is connected with this specific tenant. So when we are talking about dev apps, so dev is always connected with your dev tenant. When we are making UAT is always connected with your UAT tenant. UAT tenant means your data service, your process, the storage bucket, or anything. Okay.
Okay, so now let's say in the production, you have got certain changes. Now you will go open your dev app, right? And try to test out whatever changes are there. You did that, it's working. Next, what you will do, and you just highlight the steps. Once your dev is ready, dev app is completely working.
So now, once your dev is ready, you will try to maybe published, or maybe you can say promote into UAT. So just go into UAT, whatever existing UAT app you have, then you can just delete that, and then clone, or maybe you can say import export, and then change the while you are cloning or importing exporting, change the connections, everything, make the connection to the UAT tenant. And then once your UAT tenant everything is ready, what you can do, you can give the permissions into your permission list, and then publish the app. And that time you will have publish, you can say URL, and then take that publish URL. So this app management will have 3 app management, one for dev, one for prod, one for UAT, right? So that for particular UAT tenant, just go and replace the URL. And once you open the apps management for UAT, you can get the latest app what you deployed into UAT tenant.
Well, I think I got the gist of it, though. It, to be honest, this seems like a roundabout way we are doing, not the best solution, because here also we are doing the same steps again and again. Delete the old app, clone it again, change the data service from development to UAT, UAT to production. Rest things do remain same. From testing side, yeah, it's good, but
Our idea is just to avoid any changes directly into tenant, like prod tenant, save the time, and then save the URL. Like don't change the URL for the users. Those
Right.
many things we are taking care of it by using this application, because
And
we are not trying to save everything. Understood?
and Piyush, if you are expecting we will have DevOps for UiPath apps that go automatically get deployed, I think
it's
see,
not a path. I think it's something that might be coming in future. Just
yeah,
like our
definitely,
process,
definitely
right?
it would be coming because no one, like no customer or client would prefer doing this, right? If
Yeah.
they have to make changes, maybe even once in 6 months, right? Why would they take a risk of, downloading and cloning and doing these things, right? So with, I think, these apps available in different features, they probably already have this on their mind and feedback from customers, because initially if someone is, getting onboarded with UiPath apps, obviously they are not going to have a successful deployment. So it would have multiple changes at the initial time. So I think probably UiPath product team is already listening to you and they're building something for that, and we might soon have something.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, once we have like solution and packaging, which we talked, right? So once that is solved, and then our problem will slowly get solved. But I'm not seeing like maybe 1.5 years, maybe 2 years right now, which due to BB expressions and everything. So that is the best solutions which we found right now, just to save, because every time if you are changing the URL and giving to end users, they will get frustrated. They will say why the URL are getting changed, and how many people once you circulated maybe or in organization again are you going to write the emails and everything. That's the reasons we have found like this is where we can maybe solve this maybe save the time, save the best practices and everything, and that's how you can do that.
So another question, like when you delete your UAD app and clone the day one, how do you give access to your UAD team to test it? Like say there are 6 to 8 test users. Do you every time you add their usernames again and again in the app to give them access?
That's what we said. That there are some prerequisites which is defined already from the UiPath team, which you have to do it, right? If you are cloning the app, every time you have to clone and give the permission. That those are prerequisites. Still, it will be there. That those will not going to change. We are just trying to save rather than making any change into production app directly. That one risk we are saving, URL we are saving, and those kind of things we are trying to solve here, right?
Okay.
All right. Anyone else having any questions?
Okay, new question.
Yeah.
Outside of what we are talking, this is kind of a little bit outside of what we talked today, since no one is asking any other questions. Did anyone thought about bringing in charts within the app somewhere? It could be anything outside of what we do in basic level, more about how we can visualize our data using apps. Any thoughts about that?
So right now you can either connect with your process and bring Excels and everything, right? Through Excel, if you have to write those again, it brings kind of an image file. So that what you can do if you have to do like a more kind of visualization, you can opt a kind of tool like maybe like we are using kind of Power BI for one of the customers, and through Power BI you can just build your nice reports and everything and put that maybe in a iframe containers into your apps, and that's how you can do that. Most of the low code apps, because even if you talk about low codes, these charts and everything, it becomes very much complex. You will not get a kind of features which you have into either Tableau or you can say Power BI. So if you are looking at nice reports, very complex report, you will have to go through that third part like reporting tools, visualization tool, and then you can call that into iframe, and then you can just display into your apps.
Okay. Did you try doing the same with UiPath Insights by any chance?
UiPath Insight we have not tried, because that is again another cost which is little bit heavily lifting to the customer, because most of the customer who is using UiPath or you can say Power Platform, they have already inbuilt maybe license with the UiPath, Power BI or something. So we are using just those.
Okay.
All right.
Anyone else?
I think again Piyush will be like after 1 minute. Wait, I have one more question.
I'm still thinking what else, because I have got Parth and Arvind over here, so it's best time to just ask out any questions that's out there.
Definitely you guys can reach out to us post call as well. Not to you, Piyush, but to others. So
yeah. Any questions, anytime reach out to us on LinkedIn, or maybe try to post more on forum. So we will keep posting the solution. So everyone can see, because if you try to reach out one-to-one, we will solve the issue, but it will be one-to-one.
Not everyone will know
Yeah.
about.
Yeah, so
Yes.
if you just try to post into forum, anyone can just see, and then we can get the solutions, okay? And we are looking more maybe like feedback on app side. So if you have any feedbacks, just please reach out to us. Maybe what could be best and what the challenge you are facing. We will be very glad to listen that, and we can maybe take it forward to the product team.
Yep.
Hello, Arvind. Hi, Arvind.
Yes,
One question. So
Yep,
can you
yep.
tell me some of the market use cases for this actions apps, please? One or two is fine. One also fine.
So market use cases, there could be a number of use cases which we have done, like maybe you assume like in your organization, there are kind of invoice process management also, where you are just uploading your invoice or maybe just taking through approval process, and it is going into backend and doing certain operations, right? So you can just capture all the data, and then you can just trigger a process, and process will take care of the rest of the things, right? So what happens if you have a process, and if you have a kind of apps, you can just centralize your data rather than putting everything in Excel or anything somewhere else. So you can centralize your data, centralize your notification, and then you can manage tomorrow, right? So that is kind of one invoice process management. If you have HR onboarding system right now, suppose internally, so suppose if you have HR onboarding, suppose you make it kind of public apps or internal apps. You just go and fill your details, like I have this information, XYZ for HR onboarding. HR onboarding. So through apps, what we will do, we will write some certain rules where it will go to your Active Directory, create Active Directory through process or maybe front end, whatever. Then just go and allocate your laptop, send to your laptop. So those kind of, you can say, like by using UiPath backend, UiPath process, and then you can say front end, it will becomes like a kind of one platform. So you don't need to rely on third party other systems like for the front end. So apps is giving more kind of a strength to the RPA process, where you will have a front end plus back end, and again all other components which we have into UiPath. So it becomes like a kind of complete platform from the front end to back end, right?
Okay, got it.
Anyone else?
So I have one requirement. Can you suggest whether this can be feasible with these apps?
Please go ahead.
Okay, suppose as you said, invoice process. What is reading invoices using document understanding? After that, it will create a task in Action Center. So whether that 100% accuracy is there or not, I wanted to check. User wanted to check. In that time, every task they can open it from Action Center and can they check each task to verify whether the bot is captured correctly from the document using document understanding?
So I think the document understanding has a very tightly kind of integration between Action Center, and then Action Center, maybe just I'm telling you the Action Center is coming with this year, maybe like integration Action Center with apps. So maybe the Action Center, whatever you have, like forms and everything, that will be still there. But apart from that, you will have apps also. So now the whole target is just making apps as a kind of front end. So yeah, you can do that. But right now, document understanding, which piece you are telling while you are making the forms and everything, that is more tightly integrated with kind of Action Center forms and all. And once apps enable that, then you can design your apps, and then you can make those document understanding approvals way through that. So right now I can say no, but down the line, yes. But for the approvals and any other nice looks and feel, you can just create into that, but not, I'm just telling about the document understanding. Maybe Parth, you can add if you have anything.
So apps and Action Center, these two are different components, concepts, is it?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So Action Center is basically you use for document validations, or if any data is to be validated or not, right? Just for that purpose, you will use Action Center. The data is extracted from invoice. You want some input from user, maybe if the bill amount is more than $10,000 or something like that. In that cases, you use Action Center. Apps you use if you want to replace some legacy application, or if you want to bring employees at a one centralized place to, interact with some of the applications that are there in your company. In that case, you use UiPath apps. You don't use UiPath apps for document validations or just taking or validating the data, right? So that is not what UiPath apps is used for. Moreover, it is used for building the applications completely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Got it.
Okay. Okay. Anyone else having any questions? All right.
Alright, so
I think we are good to end this session. We hope it was a great session for everyone to know about UiPath apps, to people who have already worked to know about UiPath apps deployment and best practices. And I see there are people who explored UiPath apps for the first time as well. In future, we'll be have more such sessions coming in soon. So please do join in for that sessions as well. And yeah, talk to you all again. Thank you.
thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.